What if, in the midst of a silent burial, when everyone is plunged into grief and farewell, a dog insisted on breaking the logic of that moment? Imagine the scene: a cemetery in the United States, grieving family and friends around a coffin, the heavy weather, the restrained crying, and suddenly that dog, who should be quiet like everyone else, starts acting in a strange way. He pulls, barks low, stares at one point, as if he wants to get everyone's attention. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever witnessed an animal trying to say something that seemed much bigger than mere instinct? A dog's behavior can reveal things that humans often fail to notice. In this particular case, as the ceremony took its course, the animal seemed determined to show something. What was he trying to point out there in front of so many emotional people? Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you. The scene, which already carried all the intensity of a funeral, gained even greater weight with the presence of that insistent animal. The dog didn't just roam the place. He seemed to fight against the will of the people who tried to contain him. With each attempt to calm him down, his reaction was even firmer, almost as if there was an urgency in his behavior. He wouldn't give up. And deep down, everyone began to realize that this was not a simple whim. Those who live with dogs know it well. They have a sharp sensitivity, perceive emotions, smells, and even signals invisible to us. That's why this scene arouses so much curiosity. After all, it was not just a restless dog, but an animal that seemed to carry a message, something that needed to be revealed right there in front of everyone. And it is precisely this detail that turned that burial into something unforgettable, an episode that left each person present questioning their own reality. Have you ever wondered why so many reports around the world show dogs acting unusually at critical times? They sense earthquakes, find missing people, detect diseases, and in some cases even seem to have a connection with what we call spirituality. Was that the case? Or was there a more rational explanation for the scene? The curious thing is that even amid the collective pain, all eyes began to turn away from the coffin to the dog. His insistence became the new center of attention. It was impossible to ignore. Every gesture, every movement seemed to carry a hidden meaning. People whispered, tried to understand, but no one could clearly explain what was happening. The most intriguing thing about this story is how a simple animal managed to completely change the course of a ceremony. It was not planned, it was not expected, but it happened. And from that moment on, every detail of that funeral began to gain a new weight, a new interpretation. Maybe you are thinking, was there something there, hidden, that only the dog could notice? Or is this behavior just another proof of how dogs are connected in a special way to humans, even in the most difficult times? The truth is that this episode opens space for deep reflections on loyalty, intuition, and the ability that dogs have to surprise us. What seemed to be just another farewell day turned into a scene marked by mystery and emotion, driven by the instinct of an animal that refused to be silent. And this is exactly where our story gains strength. Because from this unusual behavior, something began to unfold, something that no one there could imagine. And it is at that moment that you will realize that the dog was not just bothered, but trying to show something that would change everything. Now, take a deep breath and come with me, because what is about to happen in this account is what will leave you speechless. What began as a simple funeral was no longer just a farewell. It was a scene that mixed mystery, excitement, and a sense that something bigger was about to be revealed. The dog, with its almost desperate insistence, seemed to carry a truth invisible to human eyes. And maybe that's why stories like this move us so much, because they remind us that there are connections that escape common logic, but that directly touch the heart. And this is where I want to make room for you too. If this moment has already reminded you of something similar that you have lived, or if it has awakened in you some strong emotion, leave here in the comments what has touched you the most so far. It could be a memory, a reflection, or even your opinion of what this dog might be trying to show. Your participation is what transforms this space into a true community, where every story and every point of view makes a difference. And look, if this content is making sense to you, enjoy it and leave your like. It seems like a simple detail, but it is he who shows that this message was worth his time and that it deserves to reach more people. It is your gesture of support that helps this channel grow and continue to bring stories that excite, inspire, and make us think. And of course, if you're not already signed up, This is the perfect time to join us, because each new video brings experiences like this, loaded with emotion, mystery, and lessons that we take to life. By signing up, you guarantee that you won't miss anything of what's to come, and you still become part of a community that believes in the power of these stories. After all, what is happening here is not just a story. It is a journey that we share together. And speaking of journey, what comes next in this story will move you even more. In that silent setting, where every look carried the weight of loss, the dog's insistent presence seemed even more striking. But to understand the intensity of that scene, you have to go back a little and meet the family that was gathered there. An ordinary American family of simple values, but with a deep connection to that man who had just left. He wasn't just another loved one being veiled, he was the bedrock, the steadfast presence that had shaped everyone's trajectory. Father, husband, friend, dear neighbor. A man who lived honestly, who cultivated small routines that became valuable memories, like the affectionate way he greeted his children when they came home from work, or the habit of tending the garden every Sunday morning. And next to him was always the dog. Not just any dog, but a companion who seemed to have been born to be the shadow and reflection of that man. Since he was a puppy, he has grown by her side, following her every step, every gesture, every silence. The relationship between them was something that went beyond the common idea of owner and pet. There was loyalty, complicity, and a harmony that bordered on the inexplicable. It was as if the dog had learned to decipher the emotions of its owner, to understand his pauses, his pains, and even his innermost joys. Behind the scenes of that family, there was no one who did not recognize the importance of that friendship. When everyone was busy with the rush of life, it was the dog who waited patiently at the door, ready to accompany the man on a walk or just lie at his feet at the end of a tiring day. For many, it just seemed routine, but in truth it was a silent pact of presence, fidelity, and surrender. A journey of companionship that extended to the last days. And at that burial, the weight of absence became even stronger, precisely because the dog did not accept the farewell. He seemed to be the only one able to clearly feel the hidden truth of that moment. While all humans tried to cope with the loss in different ways, some in tears, others in deep silence, the animal reacted with a restlessness that no one could explain. It was as if he had the conviction that he should not be standing there, but rather revealing something that only he knew. This behavior did not come out of nowhere. This dog's entire life was shaped by his relationship with that man. From the small everyday gestures to the deepest moments of transformation, the animal has been present in all the decisions that have marked the family. When the man went through health crises, the dog did not go anywhere near his bed. When times were joyful, he was the first to run in the yard, as if sharing in the celebration. It was such a strong bond that it became impossible to ignore the impact of that behavior now in front of everyone. And this is where the story begins to gain even more curious layers. Because deep down, every person present at the burial knew that that dog was not just missing. He seemed to be on a kind of journey, as if carrying a mission at that moment. There was an insistence in him that was more like a revelation about to happen. And this awakened something within each of us, a mixture of fear, hope, and curiosity. What few knew is that behind that unbreakable loyalty, there was a history of situations in which the dog had demonstrated its sensitivity out of the ordinary. It was as if I was able to sense the changes before they even happened. Some in the family recalled, for example, nights when he would get agitated for no reason, only for hours later the man to get sick or need help. Coincidence? Maybe. But at that moment, around the coffin, it seemed no coincidence at all. Now, I want to go even deeper into this matter, because it's not just about a loyal dog at a parting moment. It's about how the bond between humans and animals can reveal hidden truths, things that go unnoticed to our eyes, but manifest in subtle and powerful ways. And this connection does not arise overnight. It is built with patience, with constancy, with a mentality of care and reciprocity. The dog was not only the reflection of the owner, he was an integral part of the identity of that family, an invisible link that united generations around simple but deep values: love, fidelity, and presence. As time went on and the mood in the cemetery grew denser, relatives began to realize that they were not just facing a loss. They were facing a collective impact, an experience that would leave deep marks on each one, because the dog, with his insistence, seemed to question not only the physical absence of man, but also the choices everyone made regarding life, death, and what really matters on this journey. It was as if he said in silence, "There is something beyond what you are seeing now." That message wasn't clear, but it was strong, and he dealt with each person differently. Some wondered if there was indeed a spiritual sign there. Others believed that it was just instinct, but deep down, everyone felt the same. The dog knew something they didn't. And when we think about it, we cannot help but reflect on how many times the hidden truth is right in front of us, but we ignore it because we are stuck with conventions, superficial explanations, or even the fear of seeing what we do not want to see. The dog at that moment represented the courage to go beyond appearances, to defy cold logic and lead us to a deeper understanding of life and death. What happened at that funeral was not just an isolated scene. It was an invitation to look differently at the bonds we have built, at the signals we have received, and at the silent force that guides our steps even in the darkest moments. And this is where I want to invite you to participate as well. Comment there, "This makes sense to me," because this exchange of perceptions is what keeps this conversation alive and further expands the reach of this message. Now, follow me, because the story will reveal details that will move even more with your way of seeing all this. The day of the burial dawned, charged by a silence that seemed to weigh more than the air itself. The sky was overcast, as if reflecting the collective grief of that family, and the gentle breeze that passed between the trees in the cemetery brought a sense of inevitable melancholy. People gathered around the coffin, each carrying in their eyes the memory of the man who had departed. The procession walked slowly, with restrained steps, as if each movement was part of a ritual that no one would like to fulfill, but that life imposed. It was the last goodbye of a father, husband, friend, neighbor, someone who had left deep marks in everyone's hearts. The chairs were arranged simply in 2 rows in front of the open pit. The coffin rested on metal supports covered with white flowers that contrasted with the dark tone of the wood. The closest relatives occupied the front seats, the wife with trembling hands holding a handkerchief, the children bowed low, some crying in silence, others staring at nothing as if trying to understand the extent of that loss. The mood was one of absolute respect, interrupted only by restrained sobs and sighs that betrayed the pain. And it was exactly in this environment that something stood out: the dog. He was not accommodated as many would imagine, in a mourning position next to the owners. On the contrary, his restlessness attracted everyone's attention. From time to time it let out barks that echoed through the cemetery, breaking the heavy silence of the ceremony. He tried to approach the coffin, pulling the collar tightly, not caring about the hands that tried to restrain him. It was as if every fiber of his body screamed a hidden truth that no one else could perceive. People whispered softly, some annoyed, others puzzled. It was not common to see an animal act with such intensity in a moment like that. The most sensitive, however, felt that there was something more in that scene. The dog did not just react to the atmosphere of sadness. He seemed guided by an internal force, by a mission that was not yet clear to those who were there. His fixed eyes, his quickened breathing, and the constant movements showed that it was not a question of mere anxiety. It was like trying to say, "Pay attention, something needs to be seen." With each unsuccessful attempt to advance to the coffin, his anguish increased. The barking, though not loud, carried an oddity that was hard to ignore. It wasn't just noise. It was like a message disguised in sound, a desperate plea for someone to understand what was happening. And interestingly, while everyone tried to keep their composure, many began to look away from the ceremony to observe that behavior. It was impossible not to wonder what was he trying to show. The atmosphere changed little by little. The pain of parting mixed with curiosity, and a kind of invisible tension took over the space. Some believed that the dog simply did not accept the loss of the owner, which in itself was already exciting. Others, however, felt that there was something beyond rational explanation. And this contrast between emotion and mystery created an even greater impact on the mind of each one who witnessed the scene. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because this moment cannot be interpreted only as an instinctive reaction. What was happening there carried a powerful symbolism. Think of the weight that the environment had: the closed coffin, the definitive farewell, the faces marked by restrained crying. Every detail of the scene reinforced the idea of an end, of a full stop. But the dog, with his insistence, seemed to challenge this closing mentality. as if reminding everyone that the answers are not always before our eyes. And when we think about it, we realize how much our own journey is marked by signs that we ignore. Often, in the face of painful situations, we prefer comfortable silence, accept superficial explanations, and move on without question. But that dog didn't accept silence. It represented the courage to interrupt logic, to challenge static grief, and to point to a revelation that had not yet been understood. The relatives tried to restrain him firmly, but with each movement, the animal again threw itself forward, as if it were impossible to keep it away from the coffin. It was as if there was an invisible line pulling him, a force greater than his own obedience. And this, for many present, generated goosebumps, because deep down everyone knew that animals have perceptions that we humans cannot grasp. What if that dog was somehow trying to save the truth behind that moment? It is at this point that the scene goes beyond the limits of a simple burial and turns into something even more grandiose. Because it was not just a farewell to a beloved man, but an instant in which canine loyalty seemed to break through the barriers of the invisible. The impact of this contrast between human pain and animal insistence made every second a unique experience, capable of profoundly marking everyone who was there. And what was most impressive was the way in which, even amid tears and sadness, this behavior awakened a new mentality among those present. Some began to look at the dog with empathy, acknowledging his pain. Others wondered if he was not revealing something beyond, something that could only be understood if one had the courage to see beyond appearances. Deep down, each person who witnessed that scene carried with them a seed of reflection. It was impossible to get out of there without thinking about the strength of the connection between humans and animals, without considering the possibility that there are things that happen behind the scenes of life that go beyond our logical understanding. And it is precisely this clash between the visible and the invisible that made that burial so unforgettable. The wife of the deceased in particular seemed to feel this even more intensely. Her eyes, red from crying, were fixed on the dog, as if seeking an answer from him. It was as if, in the midst of her own pain, there was a thread of hope that this behavior could mean something beyond simple loss. This mixture of grief and curiosity left her silent, watching her every move with an almost hypnotic attention. And so, as the coffin began to be prepared for the descent, the dog stirred even more, almost desperate. The ceremony went on, but it was evident that there was something in that instant that no one could ignore. Each bark echoed as a reminder that perhaps the story was not as complete as it seemed. Right there, I'm on this journey too, because this moment is more than a farewell scene. It's an invitation to see beyond the obvious. Now let's go even deeper, because what was about to happen after that instant would completely change everyone's perception of that day. The tension in the cemetery increased every second. The restrained crying of people mixed with the sound of muffled barking, creating a kind of soundtrack that completely deviated from the respectful silence that was expected at a farewell ceremony. The dog did not seem to understand the solemnity of the moment, or perhaps understood it in an even deeper way than any human present. His panting breath, his tense body, his gaze fixed on the coffin, everything indicated that there was an urgency in him, as if he was about to reveal something that everyone ignored. Those closest tried to keep their composure, but it was impossible not to be affected. The environment was heavy, and the animal seemed to carry the role of messenger alone. Some believed that this was just the extreme expression of longing, a demonstration of the transformation that the absence of the owner caused in him. Others, however, regarded the behavior as an enigma, something that went beyond the limits of logic and entered the field of occult revelations. It was as if the dog was able to access an invisible space where the answers to that restlessness were hidden. An older woman, leaning on her cane, quietly commented to those next to her that this was not normal. His voice came out trembling, not from fear, but from a strange conviction that something was yet to come. With each bark, she frowned, as if trying to put together pieces of an invisible puzzle. And this feeling began to spread among those present, the feeling that what was happening could not be reduced to a simple emotional reaction. On the other side, a man known to the family tried to disguise the nuisance. He looked at the dog impatiently, as if he wished someone would take him away. For him, this was a moment of silence and respect, and the restless presence of the animal became almost an affront. His stern look contrasted with the tenderness of others, who saw in the scene a unique beauty. as if the dog was the embodiment of the purest loyalty. This division of mindsets made clear how human perceptions are shaped by beliefs, internal decisions, and distinct ways of dealing with the inexplicable. Meanwhile, the children were still stuck in the dilemma of understanding what was going on. The older man, now a teenager, watched everything with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. There was an early maturity about him, which made him believe that this behavior might not be by chance. His eyes narrowed, following each attempt of the dog to approach the coffin, as if he was about to witness something extraordinary. The youngest, still a child, could not hide his fear. She held her mother's hand tightly, repeating softly that she didn't want the dog to cry like the meanwhile. The children were still stuck in the dilemma of understanding what was going on. The older man, now a teenager, watched everything with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. There was an early maturity about him, which made him believe that this behavior might not be by chance. His eyes narrowed, following each attempt of the dog to approach the coffin, as if he was about to witness something extraordinary. The youngest, still a child, could not hide his fear. She held her mother's hand tightly, repeating softly that she didn't want the dog to cry like that. The mother, in silence, just hugged him while trying to control her own tears. This contrast between innocence and deep insight showed the collective impact of that scene. Each person was living the same moment, but from within different realities. And this diversity of interpretations only added to the suspense. Because deep down, everyone felt that there was a hidden truth there, but no one had the courage to name it. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter. Because what was at stake was not only the farewell of a man or the loyalty of an animal. It was the very way people dealt with signs that defy reason. When faced with something they don't understand, many seek comfort in quick, almost automatic explanations. It's a way to protect yourself from the discomfort of facing the unknown. Others, however, prefer to open up, even if it means entering a journey of uncertainty and mystery. This difference of mentality was exposed in that burial in an almost painful way. The dog, however, was not interested in human divisions. He simply insisted. Its paws scraped the ground, its ears held high, its tail motionless like an arrow pointed forward. With each attempt to move forward, his body trembled, and those present could feel his energy vibrating like an electric current in the air. It wasn't just nostalgia. There was a visceral determination in him, as if to say that it was not yet time to close that chapter. And this insistence stirred everyone's mind, because the more the dog struggled against the leash, the more the feeling grew that there was something to be discovered. Some looked away, fearing to get carried away by irrational thoughts. Others, however, could not switch off. They were paralyzed as if the scene had an irresistible magnetism. It was impossible not to imagine that behind that agitation there was a message. The suspense increased when the barking stopped for a few moments, only to resume even more intense. It was as if the dog was gathering strength, trying to find the exact moment to act. And this created in the environment an irregular rhythm, almost like a drumbeat that prepared everyone for something unexpected. The coffin, motionless before everyone, now seemed to carry not only the body of the man, but also a secret kept under lock and key. Each face there reflected a different piece of that tension. Some cried even more, as if the dog's behavior was a reminder of the absence that would never be filled. Others were silent, eyes wide, as if sensing a revelation about to happen. The wife, motionless, had her gaze fixed, alternating between the coffin and the animal, as if inside her there was a silent battle between the desire to ignore and the need to understand. It was as if the dog was a link between the visible world and an invisible space, loaded with symbols and meanings that went beyond the moment. With every pull of the leash, with every muffled groan, he seemed to say, "Look deeper. There is something you are not seeing." And it created an almost unbearable sense of expectation. The weight of that moment was not only in the mourning, but in what was hidden behind it. The animal transformed the farewell into a collective experience of questioning, an involuntary invitation to see beyond the surface. He did not accept the idea of closure. It was as if he shouted with his whole body that this was not the end. And this silent conviction shook those present in different ways. Some thought of personal experiences, memories of situations when a dog had sensed something. Others sought spiritual explanations, believing that the animal carried a mission. And then there were those who closed in, annoyed, as if they could not bear the idea that life could be greater than what reason allows to explain. However, no one managed to get out of there indifferent. The impact of that scene spread like an invisible wave, through every look, every thought, every breath. The confusion was not just collective, it was internal. Each person carried within him a doubt that did not find an answer, and this doubt united them in silence, even if they thought differently. The dog would not stop. The dog would not stop. His energy seemed unbreakable, as if it was sustained by something beyond physical strength. And this persistence was what kept everyone in suspense, as if time itself had slowed down to witness that unique moment. He comments there, "I'm on this journey too, because this moment goes far beyond a simple farewell ritual." Now I want to go even deeper into this matter. What was already intense in the cemetery took on an even greater dimension when the dog, unable to contain himself, began to act in ways that no one there could have imagined. Until then, his insistence had been limited to low barks, tugs on the leash, and that restlessness that had already aroused collective discomfort. But suddenly, the strength of his loyalty exceeded any limit. With his paws firmly on the ground, he began to scratch the earth in front of the coffin, as if he wanted to dig his way to the owner. The sound of claws against the damp ground cut through the silence, as a painful reminder that that bond would not be easily broken. The eyes immediately turned to the scene. Some tried to hold the dog tighter, but he wouldn't back down. His whole body trembled with determination, and it was as if every movement was guided by an invisible force. With each scratch, the tension increased. It was not just a gesture of despair, but a silent cry of love and fidelity. The impact of that behavior reached Eva. The eyes immediately turned to the scene. Some tried to hold the dog tighter, but he wouldn't back down. His whole body trembled with determination, and it was as if every movement was guided by an invisible force. With each scratch, the tension increased. It was not just a gesture of despair, but a silent cry of love and fidelity. The impact of that behavior reached everyone present, because at that moment everyone understood, even if without words, how much that animal refused to accept the separation. When they realized that he would not give up on getting closer, some family members tried to restrain him, but the dog used every muscle in his body as if he was willing to fight to the end. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, he threw himself on the coffin, lying there with the weight of his pain. His dizzy eyes seemed to fix on something that no one else could see, and lying down began to hijah. The children cried even more when they heard the howl. The adults tried to keep their posture, but the scene broke every heart. Some closed their eyes, as if they could not bear to witness such surrender. Others raised their hands to their mouths in shock, recognizing in that act a rare purity, impossible to explain by reason. It was as if the dog was able to expose behind the scenes of that ceremony the hidden truth that no one wanted to face. Love does not end when life ends. And this gesture aroused different reflections in each person. For some, it was a sign of transformation, an invitation to rethink one's way of living, to question one's priorities and realize that in the end, it is the true bonds that remain. For others, the scene was almost unbearable, because it gaped the pain that everyone carried, but tried to hide under the solemnity of the ritual. The dog, however, did not know about social conventions. He simply lived his truth, giving himself entirely. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this scene shows us how often the human mentality tries to control what is uncontrollable. While those present tried to maintain decorum, follow the ceremony within the expected molds, the dog broke through these barriers. He wasn't worried about looking strong, holding back tears, or hiding emotions. He just let go of what he felt. And in a way, this brave act became a mirror for everyone there, revealing how much we repress our own feelings in the name of social standards. The impact was so great that even the one responsible for conducting the ritual stopped for a few moments. His voice, which until then had narrated prayers and parting words, fell silent before that howl. There was no way to compete with the emotional force of the scene. Everyone realized that in that instant, it was not human speech that dominated, but the pure expression of animal loyalty. It was a stark and undeniable revelation that true love knows no boundaries, no time, no conventions. Neighbors, friends, and relatives were torn between trying to stop the animal and allowing it to live that moment. Some murmured that it might be better to leave him there on the coffin as part of the farewell. Others, uncomfortable, believed that it disrupted the rite, that it was necessary to control the situation. But regardless of opinions, no one could deny the profound impact of what they were witnessing. The dog, lying on the cold wood, stood motionless between one howl and another, as if absorbing the presence of the owner for the last time. His eyes remained fixed, and his body, instead of calming down, seemed even more given to pain. It was impossible not to feel a tightness in my chest when I saw him in that position. Not only did he suffer, he refused to let go, and that raised a question that hung in the air, even if no one had the courage to express it out loud. What did he know that others didn't? Was it just pain? Or was there a hidden truth that your sensibility was trying to reveal? This question echoed behind the scenes of each person's thought there, like a shadow that could not be pushed away. Reactions varied, but the scene united everyone in the same state of vulnerability. The atmosphere of farewell turned into something bigger, almost as if it were the beginning of a collective journey of self-knowledge. The dog had become an unexpected guide, showing that the deepest revelations often come from those we least expect. The children watched with wide eyes. For them, the dog was part of the family, a silent brother who had shared all the important moments. Seeing him in that state was like reliving one's own multiplied pain. The elder wiped away his tears in silence, but could not take his eyes off the scene. The youngest, with the innocence of childhood, only quietly repeated that the dog did not want to let his father go, and perhaps this was the purest and truest interpretation of all. Meanwhile, the wife remained motionless. The handkerchief in his hands was soaked with tears, but his gaze remained fixed on the animal. There was in her a mixture of grief, gratitude, and something bordering on hope, as if somehow that gesture of the dog reminded her that the bond she had with her husband would not be destroyed by death. And it was thus between howls and silence that the mood of the burial reached its apex. The dog would not give up. Each scratch on the ground, each attempt to get closer, each wail that echoed through the air, built an unforgettable scene. There was no ignoring the force of that moment, which surpassed any rational explanation. Right there. This makes sense to me because this gesture of loyalty is one of the most intense proofs that true love never fades. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter. The scene, which was already charged with emotion, began to take on an even more unsettling outline when some glances silently crossed paths. The dog, lying on the coffin, howling incessantly, gave no sign of giving up. His movements were no longer only of pain, but of an almost desperate insistence, as if he were trying to wrest from it something hidden, something that everyone else refused to see. The impact of that behavior caused a suspicion to arise in the intimate of some present. And it was at this moment that one of the closest relatives, a middle-aged man, the brother of the deceased, raised his voice with a certain firmness, as if he was finally saying in words what everyone felt, but did not have the courage to admit: there is something wrong. This dog is not just crying for the owner. He's trying to show something. The murmur ran through the group of people like a spark in a dry field. Until then, everyone had simply interpreted the scene as an intense show of loyalty, but those words made room for guarded thoughts to surface. Some looked at each other restlessly as if waiting for confirmation. Others shook their heads trying to push that idea away. But the truth is that no one could ignore the weight of that behavior anymore. Among those present was a respected figure, a local doctor, a long-time acquaintance of the family, someone whose word carried authority. He approached slowly, with a serious look, watching the dog, who was now scratching the lid of the coffin again insistently. The animal's breathing was breathless. Its body seemed to be seized with uncontrollable urgency. The doctor crossed his arms, analyzed for a few seconds, and then spoke quietly but firmly. This behavior is not common. It could just be nostalgia, yes. But there may also be something we're not seeing. Perhaps it would be prudent to check the coffin. The words fell like a weight in the air. Suddenly the environment was torn between fear and curiosity. Some thought it absurd to interrupt the ritual because of the agitation of a dog. Others, however, felt a shiver run through their bodies, as if those words confirmed their own silent suspicions. The solemn mood gave way to a suffocating suspense. Crying, once predominant, gave way to tense whispers, exchanged glances, and racing hearts. The wife of the deceased raised her face, red eyes fixed on the doctor, seeking a clearer explanation. "What do you mean by that?" he asked in a choked voice, between the pain of loss and the fear of the unknown. The doctor took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully, like someone who carries on his shoulders the responsibility of suggesting something that could completely change the course of that farewell. Animals have heightened senses. They perceive smells, vibrations, signals that we can't pick up. If he is reacting so insistently, it may be that there is something inside the coffin that needs to be checked. I'm not saying it's for sure, but we can't rule out that possibility. The reactions were mixed. One of the family friends, visibly nervous, exclaimed that this was disrespectful, that there was no place to interrupt the ceremony. Another, however, supported the idea, recalling stories in which dogs had saved lives precisely because of their extraordinary sensitivity. It was as if suddenly everyone was forced to make a decision that was not in the original plans, to go ahead with the farewell or to heed the silent call of the dog. As the debate intensified into whispers and strained glances, the animal increased the strength of its scratches. The sound of his claws against the wood of the coffin became more and more desperate. He howled louder, completely ignoring efforts to restrain him. It was as if he knew that he was close to revealing something important, and he could not, under any circumstances, be interrupted. This scene made it impossible to remain neutral. Even the most skeptical began to feel the weight of the mystery. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because here we enter a crucial point in the narrative. The difference between accepting the apparent logic or allowing yourself to consider the invisible. The human mentality usually rejects what escapes from normality. It is easier to believe that everything is coincidence, that there is nothing but what is before the eyes. But when someone in authority, be it a doctor, a policeman, or any respected figure, points out that there may be something beyond, this belief is shaken. The trust placed in reference persons forces us to look again at the situation and consider the possibility of hidden revelations. The dog, knowing nothing of conventions or hierarchies, just followed his mission, but the impact of their actions grew because there was now a human backer, a respected voice that echoed everyone's concern. This clash between animal instinct and human reasoning created a powerful tension, as if both were uniting to open the doors of a truth that until then had remained locked. And it is in this encounter that everyone's journey in that cemetery was transformed. The wife trembled, not knowing whether she wanted the coffin to be opened or not. His mind whirled in a whirlwind of decisions. Go through with the ritual and end the farewell in the traditional way, or give in to the mystery that imposed itself before his eyes. This was a choice that carried weight, because it could mean both an important revelation and an even greater shock to the family. Every look was turned to her, waiting for the answer, and the weight of this moment was unbearable. Meanwhile, the dog did not stop howling as if in a hurry. Time seemed to slow down. The doctor kept his gaze fixed, the serious expression of one who knew that his suggestion might be misinterpreted, but who could not simply ignore what he was seeing. And each person present, even those who tried to stand firm, felt the same question inside. Was there more inside that coffin than everyone imagined? The suspense was almost palpable. The wind passing through the trees seemed to carry along the accumulated tension. Each leaf that moved on the ground reinforced the feeling that the entire environment was in waiting, as if nature itself was waiting for the final decision. It was impossible to escape from this atmosphere. Everyone there was connected by an invisible thread of expectation, fear, and curiosity. The dog tirelessly scratched, pulled, howled. The coffin, motionless, seemed to hold secrets greater than death itself. And the family, torn between reason and emotion, between logic and mystery, had to decide what to do in the face of that appeal. He comments, "I'm on this journey too, because what's happening here is more than a scene. It's a deep dive into everything we believe about life, death, and revelations beyond our control. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter." The silence that enveloped the cemetery was different from all previous ones. It was no longer the respectful silence of a farewell ritual, but that charged with expectation, the kind of silence that precedes a revelation capable of changing everything. The dog, still lying on the coffin, howled at shorter and shorter intervals, as if impatient, as if asking for urgency. His eyes were fixed, his breath panted, and his whole body seemed to vibrate in one direction, to open that wooden box. The wife, with her soaked handkerchief in her hands, looked at her children without knowing what to do. The brother of the deceased, who had raised the suspicion, repeated that it was not just sadness that there was something there. The local doctor, with a serious attitude, reinforced the idea that the situation deserved attention. And between all the glances, a mood of tension set in. Go ahead with the ceremony, ignoring the dog's instinct, or give in to what now seemed inevitable, opening the coffin. After a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, the gravedigger, under the insistence of the family and the endorsement of the doctor, approached. His trembling hands held the metal handles that held the lid closed. The sound of metal being released echoed through the cemetery like a crack that made some take a step back. Each click of the locks seemed to mark the rhythm of a collective heart that beat fast. The dog, noticing the movement, immediately got up, barking louder, as if approving the decision. When the lid began to be lifted, the air seemed to weigh. Some closed their eyes, unable to face what might come of it. Others leaned forward, taken by curiosity. The smell of wood and flowers mingled with that of wet earth, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Even the wind seemed to stop, as if nature itself was waiting for revelation. And then, when the coffin was finally opened, what they found wasn't what everyone expected. There was not only the body at rest. Inside, resting on the chest of the deceased, was a foreign object, wrapped in an ancient cloth. The dog immediately tried to move forward, directing its muzzle towards that wrapping as if it wanted to tear it away from there. The doctor, puzzled, asked them to carefully remove the cloth. What appeared before everyone's eyes was a small dark wooden box with symbols engraved on its surface. Time seemed to have corroded its corners, but it was still possible to notice that there was something special, almost mysterious about this artifact. The deceased's brother widened his eyes, muttering that he had never seen that before. The surprised wife shook her head, repeating that she had no idea where the object had come from. The confusion was immediate. What was that box doing there? Why was she hiding inside the coffin next to the deceased? And even more so, how did the dog know about your presence? Silence gave way to nervous whispers, trampled questions, incredulous looks. Some thought it was a secret kept by the deceased, something that no one had discovered in life. Others, more superstitious, believed that this object carried some kind of curse or revelation from the past. The dog, however, did not take his eyes off the box. His behavior was almost frantic, as if his mission had been accomplished, to show that there was something hidden, something that needed to be revealed. He growled low, not in threat, but in alertness, as if to ensure that no one was unaware of the importance of what had just been discovered. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because here we are talking not just about a material mystery, but about the impact that an unexpected revelation can have on an entire family. Imagine, you grow up believing that you know every detail of the life of someone close, every habit, every secret, every decision. And suddenly, at the most fragile moment, when everything should only be farewell and mourning, a new piece appears, an element that breaks logic and opens space for questions about who that person really was. This transformation in perception is so powerful that it can rewrite memories, alter truths, and completely change the course of a story. The doctor, trying to calm those present, suggested that they open the small box to understand what it was about, but the wife hesitated. Her trembling hands did not dare to touch that object, as if simple contact could forever change her relationship with her husband, even after death. The decision became a collective burden: open and face what was inside, or close the coffin again and live forever with doubt. This dilemma opened up the essence of the human condition, the choice between the security of not knowing and the risk of discovering a hidden truth, and each person there carried his own mentality in relation to this. Some begged to open at once, eager for the revelations. Others urged caution, fearing the impact it could have. The dog, however, had no doubts. He remained motionless, but his fixed eyes seemed to tell him that the box needed to be opened, no matter what the cost. The suspense became unbearable. Time seemed to stand still inside that cemetery. Even the children, who once cried, were now mesmerized by the scene. The dog's howling had ceased, giving way to a heavy silence, as if even he knew that the moment demanded calm and attention. And when finally the lid of the small box was lifted, everyone held their breath. Inside it, neatly folded, were old letters, documents yellowed by time, and a golden ring with an inscription that no one recognized there. The wife, seeing that, put her hands to her mouth, her eyes waterlogged in shock. That wasn't his, he muttered almost without a voice. The letters, as far as one could quickly see, carried names that no one knew, strange signatures, dates that went back decades. There were also crossed-out words, as if someone had tried to hide part of the truth. The ring, gleaming discreetly in the grey light of that day, seemed to carry in itself a silent story, a connection with someone who until then had not been part of the narrative of that family. The mood of farewell was completely replaced by a mood of mystery and revelation. It was no longer just a burial. It was as if the life of the deceased had just gained a new chapter, an unexpected hoop that no one knew about. His wife, still in shock, shook her head in denial. The brother, astonished, said he needed to understand what it meant, and the friends, perplexed, just looked at each other without the courage to say anything. The dog, satisfied that he had fulfilled his role, sat down next to the coffin, panting but silent. Their mission seemed to have been completed, and now it was up to the humans to deal with that revelation. He comments, "That makes sense to me, because this scene shows how much life can hide truths that only come to light when we least expect them." Now I want to go even deeper into this matter. The impact of the discovery reverberated with every glance. The small wooden box with its timestamps and almost indecipherable symbols had completely transformed the atmosphere of the burial. There was no longer just talk of farewell. What now settled there was a mixture of suspense and disbelief, as if reality had been torn apart to make room for a hidden plot. The dog, who until then had been seen as a suffering animal, turned out to be the true keeper of a chilling secret. His insistence was not just longing, it was a call for everyone to look at what was hidden. The letters, still folded and yellowed, exuded the characteristic smell of paper saved for decades. The golden ring reflected the grey light of day, as if it had been placed there on purpose to attract attention, and the expression of every person around showed the weight of that instant. The wife, who until then had struggled with the pain of loss, now faced a greater dilemma. Who, in fact, was the man with whom she had shared so many years of life? Because those letters and that ring didn't belong in the story she knew. The doctor, still serious, asked for calm, suggesting that someone be willing to read some of the contents, at least enough to understand the origin of those relics. The brother, seized by curiosity and also by restrained anger, opened the first letter. His voice trembled as he pronounced the words written in firm but ancient handwriting. The excerpts revealed correspondences that spoke of a secret relationship, of hidden encounters, of a parallel life that the deceased seemed to have led away from the eyes of the family. The sentences were direct. They described feelings and situations that no one there imagined. There were mentions of journeys that were never reported, of promises made to someone unknown, and even references to a name that no one recognized. The impact was devastating. The wife put her hands to her face. The children looked confused, not understanding the dimension of what it meant. Friends and neighbors muttered among themselves, shocked by the revelation that the man they all thought they knew might have hidden entire chapters of his life. The ring, with an inscription engraved inside, seemed to be material proof that these were not just unimportant letters. Engraved there in small but crisp letters was a name that no one in the family recognized, and it was in this detail that the sense of mystery increased. Who was the person mentioned? What was the connection with the deceased? And why was this object hidden next to him in the coffin? The dog next door was alert. His gaze did not deviate from the box, as if he knew that these discoveries were only the surface of something much larger. To some present, the animal's presence seemed almost supernatural. He had guided everyone until that moment, and now he stood there, silent, as if waiting for the humans to figure out the rest on their own. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what unfolded there was not only the disclosure of a family secret, it was the transformation of a narrative of grief into a narrative of discovery. Until then, everyone was immersed in the pain of loss, stuck in the mentality that burial represented an end. But suddenly, the scene gained the weight of a beginning, the beginning of a journey of revelations that would put in check everything they knew about the deceased. This change in perspective has a profound impact, because it shows that often, even the people we think we know completely keep invisible facets, hidden choices, decisions that we never share. The letters, as they were opened, revealed more details. There were mentions of saved money, places no one in the family knew about, and even encounters with people from out of town. Each sentence was like a piece of a puzzle that, instead of bringing clarity, further added to the confusion. The brother, increasingly distressed, wondered aloud how it was possible that the man had kept all this a secret. The devastated wife wept not only at the loss, but also at the feeling that her husband had been in part a stranger for so many years. The friends present, who had previously consoled with hugs and words, now simply watched in silence. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared at the ground, as if unwilling to partake of that revelation. The environment had changed. It was no longer mourning. It was distrust. It was mystery. It was the feeling that the backstage of the life of the deceased was being exposed before everyone. And in the midst of this turmoil, the dog stood firm, as if his instinct had fulfilled the mission of revealing what no one would have the courage to seek. His loyalty was not limited to attachment to the owner, but seemed to be connected to a hidden truth, as if he had sensed that that box could not be buried without first being known. The suspense grew by the minute. There were those who thought that these revelations could tarnish the memory of the deceased, that it would be better to keep the letters and forget about it. But there were also those who believed that the truth, however painful, needed to come out. The dilemma spread to everyone present, and each person took an internal position in the face of the situation: hide to preserve the image of the man they knew, or expose and face the reality that those letters brought. The dog, motionless now, seemed to be the only one without a doubt. His breathing still quickened. His bright eyes and attentive posture were like a reminder that there was no turning back. The secret had already been revealed, and it made no sense to pretend that nothing had happened. He looked at his wife, then at the doctor, as if waiting for someone to take the next step. And it is precisely at this point that the story completely changes course. Because what was discovered not only shook the family, but also put everyone in front of the need to reassess their own beliefs. It was as if that coffin, instead of ending a life, had opened a door to a universe of questions. Who was that man, really? What had he done over the years in secret? And why did you choose to carry those memories with you to the end? The emotional transformation was palpable. The climate of mourning had turned into a climate of search, of investigation, of revelations that were yet to come. And in this process, each person present was forced to face not only the figure of the deceased, but also their own mentality in the face of the unknown. Right there, I'm on this journey too, because this discovery shows that we don't always know the whole truth about those we love, and that sometimes it takes courage to look beyond the surface. Now, I want to go even deeper into this matter. The shock that engulfed everyone in that cemetery was not just a passing start, but a real emotional earthquake that shook every person present. The coffin, which until recently symbolized only a solemn farewell to a beloved man, was now the scene of a rapturous mystery. The letters scattered on the floor, the golden ring with the unknown inscription, the aged wooden box, all these elements turned the scenery into something bigger than a simple farewell. It was as if that burial had become a revelation, an abrupt break from the certainties built over a lifetime. The dog, silent now, watched with a watchful eye, carrying the aura of one who always knew that there was something hidden there. His mission seemed clear: to show humans that there was a hidden truth and that it could not be buried next to the body. The wife, until then grieving, broke into a muffled cry that echoed among the trees, charged not only with pain but with disbelief. That sound was not of one who mourns only death, but of one who sees a whole marital history fall apart before his own eyes. She knelt before the coffin, her hands trembling on the papers, as if seeking urgent answers that the texts could not offer. With each line he read, his expression changed. First confusion, then denial, and finally a quiet despair, like one who realizes that perhaps he has never really met the man to whom he has dedicated his entire life. Children, unable to fully understand the depth of the situation, reacted in different ways. The eldest, mature enough to connect the dots, wept silently, wondering if his father had lied all those years. His eyes, dizzy, betrayed not only sadness, but also an almost adult frustration, the pain of seeing an idol crumble. The youngest, lost in the innocence of childhood, huddled in his mother's lap, not understanding the details, but feeling in the air the heavy, dense energy that enveloped everyone. He repeated softly that he did not want the dog to cry like that again, as if the infantile instinct tried to cling to what was simpler and purer, fleeing from the complexity of that revelation. Friends and neighbors, in turn, exchanged looks of shock and disbelief. Some murmured that it could only be a mistake, that perhaps those letters were not his, that someone could have put it in the coffin. Others, more introspective, were silent, acknowledging that the scene left no room for so many excuses. The doctor, who had taken the first step in suggesting opening the coffin, maintained a serious posture, but within himself it was evident that he was impressed. His professional authority forced him to restrain expressions of amazement, but his eyes betrayed surprise and even some discomfort. He had proposed that decision because he believed in the dog's instinct, but he would never have imagined that the revelation would be so devastating. In the midst of this emotional chaos, the dog, which until then had howled, scratched and struggled to be heard, now remained silent. His eyes fixed, dizzy, accompanied every gesture of the family, as if his mission was completed. He no longer needed to fight. He had managed to bring out what was hidden, and this canine serenity, contrasting with human turmoil, was perhaps the most symbolic detail of all. While people plunged into shock and disbelief, the animal conveyed a quiet calm, as if to say, "I knew. You needed to know too. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what was drawn before everyone was not only the discovery of guarded secrets, it was the collective transformation of a mindset. Until that moment, each person present had gone to the cemetery with a single function: to say goodbye. The mental script was simple: tears, silence, flowers on the coffin, prayers and shared memories. But what happened there was the breakdown of that script. The shock was not only from the information hidden in the letters, but from the fact that everyone was forced to abandon the comfort of predictable logic and face the unexpected. This rupture brought with it an uncomfortable truth. We never know someone completely, not even those we love deeply, and the impact of this revelation spread like waves on a lake. The wife wondered how much of her life had been built on illusions. The brother of the deceased, seized with anger, muttered confused phrases, as if he wanted to protect his brother's memory and at the same time demand explanations that would never come. The closest friends, who had always defended the honor and integrity of the deceased, were now silent, avoiding even looking at each other, as if they did not want to share the responsibility of that shock. Each person processed in their own way, but the invisible link between them was the same: the feeling that this burial had become something that would mark their lives forever. The tears that flowed were no longer only of mourning, but also of disappointment and frustration. This man, whom everyone thought to be of integrity, carried secrets with him that they never imagined. And this contrast between the public image and the hidden backstage created a lump in everyone's throat. The whole environment seemed heavier, as if the air itself had become denser. Even the wind that once blew gently now seemed icy, laden with symbolism that was hard to explain. But at the same time, there were those who began to view that scene with a certain amount of fascination. Because in a strange way, it was as if everyone was participating in something extraordinary, something that crossed the boundaries of the ordinary. The dog was not just a suffering animal, but a link between the visible and the invisible, between the man everyone thought he knew and the hidden truth he tried to carry with him to the grave. This perception stirred deeply in each one's mind, making it clear that sometimes it is not human words or gestures that reveal the truth, but rather unexpected signs, instincts, omens that come from where we least expect it. And so, while the coffin remained open and the documents were handled with trembling hands, while the ring discreetly reflected the grey light of that cloudy day, while the dog kept its serene vigil, each person present there carried with him a new version of the story, more complex, more painful, but also closer to reality. The collective emotion was palpable. There was no longer anyone who remained indifferent. All without exception had been touched by the shock of that revelation, and all knew in silence that nothing would be as before. He comments there, "This makes sense to me, because moments like this remind us that even in the heart of pain can arise truths capable of transforming everything we thought we knew. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter." The commotion that engulfed everyone in that cemetery began to give way to a new, almost unanimous perception. None of this would have been discovered if it had not been for the dog. The animal, once seen only as a faithful companion taken by longing, now revealed itself as the guiding thread of all the transformation that had taken place before everyone's eyes. He was the first to stir, the only one to break the respectful silence that the ceremony imposed, the one who had the courage to challenge the hands that tried to contain him and to insist to the limit, as if he carried within himself the mission of revealing a hidden truth. Without it, the coffin would have been closed, the earth would have covered the mystery, and that secret would remain buried forever. It was impossible not to recognize that his despair was not a reaction at all, but a kind of call to something greater. The wife, still shaken, looked at the dog differently now. Her gaze was no longer merely one of tenderness, but of deep recognition, as one awakens from sudden blindness. It was as if he finally realized that the dog, through all those years, had been more than just a companion in life. He had been a silent guardian, someone who sensed and carried in his eyes a truth that humans could not see. The children too, though confused, regarded the animal with a mixture of gratitude and reverence. For them, the dog had not only suffered from the loss of its owner, but had become the hero who brought to light what no one would have dared to imagine. One of the boys even muttered, almost in a whisper, that perhaps the father had chosen that dog for a greater reason, as if there was a hidden purpose in that connection that was now revealed. Friends and neighbors, who had previously been torn between finding the dog's behavior touching or uncomfortable, were now silent, embarrassed that they had doubted his insistence. Many murmured under their breath that they had never witnessed anything like this, and some even came forward to pat his head as a gesture of apology and thanks. The doctor, with all his authority, summed up in a few words what everyone thought: "If it were not for him, we would never know." That sentence echoed like a sentence, forever etching into everyone's heart that that animal had been the key piece of the revelation. And in that instant, everyone realized that human logic had failed, but animal intuition had triumphed. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what happened there clearly shows how the signs that we often ignore can carry an immense impact on our journey. The human mentality tends to underestimate the instinct of animals, classifying their gestures as simple emotional reactions. But they actually see what we don't see, feel what we don't feel, and at critical moments can be the bridge between illusion and truth. The dog broke through the barrier of normalcy, which is where most people hide, and brought out a revelation that only became possible because he refused to give up. And this point brings up an inevitable reflection. How many times in our own lives do important signals go unnoticed, simply because we choose to ignore them? The dog, without any concern for judgments, exposed his truth to the end. He did not shut up, did not give up, did not adapt to the silence that everyone expected. And it was precisely this stance that saved the truth, that ensured that something so relevant was not buried. If we think about it, it was not only an exciting scene, but also a metaphor about courage, loyalty, and persistence in the face of appearances. He reminds us that the truth, no matter how hidden, always gives signs. The question is whether we are willing to see them. Family members began to recognize this out loud. The brother of the deceased, once overcome by anger and confusion, approached the dog, stroked his head, and said in a choked voice, "You are the real hero here." These words moved those present even more, because they summed up in one sentence the collective feeling. The animal, which did not understand the human complexities, only remained attentive, with accelerated but serene breathing, as if it understood that its mission had been accomplished. It was as if he knew from the start that this insistence was not in vain, that something bigger was at stake. This change of perspective transformed the very climate of the burial. It was no longer just an environment of pain and shock, but also of recognition and gratitude. With each look exchanged, with each gesture of affection towards the dog, everyone knew that he had been the key, so that that family, no matter how painful it was, could see the reality behind the story of the deceased. The dog had saved more than the truth. It had saved the possibility of rebuilding, of reinterpreting the life of someone everyone thought they knew completely. Now the weight of that parting gained a new layer of meaning. The animal had become a living symbol that the truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to reveal itself. The impact of this went far beyond the cemetery. There was a silent lesson hanging in the air, that heroes don't always wear capes, they don't always use words, they aren't always human. Sometimes they have four paws, attentive eyes, and a heart capable of sacrificing themselves for loyalty. And that's exactly what that dog showed everyone. He not only changed the course of a burial, but transformed the perception of each person present about fidelity, courage, and instinct. Many left with the feeling that they had witnessed something that could never be explained by reason alone. This collective recognition made even the most skeptical surrender to the weight of the scene. There was no denying it. The truth only came out because of him. The animal became, before all, a symbol of loyalty and bravery. Someone who, with his insistence, had prevented a lie from being perpetuated forever. With every second, the realization grew that this was not just an isolated episode, but a powerful reminder about the ability to see beyond appearances. Some present even began to wonder, how many times in our lives have we buried secrets without realizing it? How often do we ignore the signs that could show us something essential? And this awareness united everyone in reverent silence, almost as a tribute to the dog, which was now seen as the protagonist of the story. He not only defied human logic, but also showed that truth, when it needs to emerge, finds unexpected means. And at that moment, everyone surrendered to this lesson, understanding that silent loyalty can carry more strength than 1,000 words. He comments there, "I'm on this journey too, because this moment shows that sometimes it is precisely the voice that cannot speak, that screams the loudest and transforms everything." Now I want to go even deeper into this matter. The silence that engulfed that cemetery, after the revelation brought by the dog, was unlike any other silence. It wasn't just grief, it wasn't just shock. It was as if everyone was trying to rearrange within themselves the logic of what they had just witnessed. The scene left no doubt. The animal had noticed something that no one else could capture. And this gave rise to a greater reflection, which transcends the instant and touches on a truth that we often avoid facing. Because, deep down, how many times do we ignore the intuition of animals, treating it as mere coincidence, when in reality there may be a silent wisdom, a kind of access to what is beyond our rational understanding? The dog, sitting exhausted but attentive, seemed to carry in his eyes a message that did not translate into words, but that everyone could feel. It was like saying, "I knew it, I saw, I felt," and that realization carried an almost sacred weight. It didn't matter if someone was religious, skeptical, rationalistic, or spiritualized. Everyone, in some way, was faced with a phenomenon that crossed boundaries of belief and plunged into the pure experience of life. There, in front of a coffin that hid more secrets than memories, it was evident that dogs do not need to speak our language to reveal truths. They may not speak like us, but they understand the heart like no one else. They feel the fears, the silences, the voids. Feel the pain before it manifests. They intuit the truth when we are still attached to appearances. This awareness began to spread among those present, as if it were an invisible thread connecting each person. Some recalled old episodes, seemingly banal moments when that same dog had behaved strangely, as if warning something. Others began to share personal stories of when their own dogs seemed to see beyond, barking into the void, staring into places where no one was, behaviors that only made sense after an unexpected event. And at that moment, the story was no longer just about that deceased man and his dog. It became about all dogs, about the way they connect with something that escapes our human understanding. It is curious how in our everyday mentality, we live surrounded by logical, scientific, and rational explanations, believing that only what can be measured or proven is real. But faced with a scene like this, we are forced to admit that there are hidden truths that do not fit into formulas or diagnoses. Animal intuition is one such truth. It reminds us that life is not only calculation, but also perception, vibration, energy. And when we look sincerely, we realize that these signs have always been there, unobtrusive, waiting for someone to be willing to pay attention. The dog insisted because he was not afraid to seem unreasonable. He was not concerned with trials or conventions. He only obeyed what he felt, and that is precisely what saved the truth from being buried. This transformation in the way those present saw the scene was visible. The wife, who still trembled at the discoveries, began to stroke the dog with tears different from the previous ones. They were no longer tears of pure pain, but also of gratitude. She whispered a few words that few have heard, something like, "I should have trusted you before." And this detail was even more exciting because it made it clear that the connection between human and animal is not just companionship. It is a form of communication that happens on another frequency. The children, even confused, looked at the dog as if recognizing a master. Not a master of words, but of sensitivity. It was as if in that instant they had learned a lesson that would never be taught in school, that truth sometimes comes to us through simple but powerful signals. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what this scene shows us is that, on our journey, we often ignore what we cannot explain. But what if the key to the greatest revelations lies precisely in these seemingly insignificant details? How many decisions do we make throughout life based only on what logic presents, while the heart, or even the instinct of those who are next to us, already told us something else? This moment in the cemetery was more than a painful discovery. It was a collective reminder that we need to rescue our ability to hear, to feel, to respect signals that don't fit formulas. Because after all, perhaps dogs are guardians of a language we have forgotten, the language of instinct, intuition, and unspoken truth. This perception deeply moved everyone there. Some were in shock, others in tears, but all were in transformation. There was an invisible impact going on, as if each person was forced to revisit old memories of their own dogs, or even of moments when they felt, without explanation, that something was wrong or about to happen. The dog, in revealing the hidden secret, had opened a door beyond that man's life. He had shown everyone that life is crossed by signs, by omens, by vibrations that do not depend on words. And that revelation would not be easily forgotten. The trembling hands that held papers and rings now also sought to stroke the dog. The looks that were once only of pain now carried respect. With each gesture of approach, the certainty grew that this animal was not only a character in the story, but the axis around which everything had revolved. Without it, there would be no transformation, there would be no revelation, there would be no truth. His insistence not only saved a secret from remaining buried, but also rescued the humanity of everyone who witnessed it. Because recognizing the heroism of the dog, everyone remembered something essential: the importance of not only closing oneself to what is logical, but also of trusting what is felt. And that is precisely where the great reflection lives. Maybe dogs don't speak our language, but they understand the heart like no one else. They notice when we are about to fall apart, when we hide a pain behind a smile, when a danger approaches before we are even aware of it. And in this sense, they become silent guardians of our lives, anonymous heroes who do not seek recognition, but only fulfill their mission. This moment, lived in that cemetery, was living proof that animal love and loyalty have a strength that surpasses any barrier of human understanding. Some might try to rationalize, seek biological or scientific explanations for the dog's behavior, but for those who were there, no theory would be enough to erase the impact of what they witnessed. The truth was simple and profound. The dog saved history. He protected the memory. He revealed what no one dared to imagine, and in doing so, he showed everyone that there is something greater at stake, an invisible link between us and these beings who share our lives, but who carry within them a sensitivity we can never measure. He comments there, "This makes sense to me because this moment is proof that, even without words, there are truths that can only be revealed by those who understand the heart beyond appearances." Now I want to go even deeper into this matter. That scene didn't leave anyone's mind. The lost looks, the trembling hands holding revealing papers, the dense silence that replaced the words. But above all, the presence of that dog, motionless now, just breathing breathlessly, but still with firm attention, as if it were fulfilling until the last moment its mission. It was impossible not to realize how much he had completely changed the course of that story. What could have been just another silent funeral had turned into a landmark event, not only for the family but for everyone who was there. There was no denying it. That dog's loyalty had exceeded all limits of what can be expected of an animal, and that's exactly what touched everyone's heart so deeply. Because if we stop to think, canine loyalty is one of the greatest mysteries, and at the same time one of the greatest gifts we receive when we allow these beings to be part of our journey. It's not just a matter of companionship, but total delivery. The dog does not question, does not calculate, does not negotiate. He simply remains. Even in the face of pain, even in the face of absence, even when the whole world seems to fall apart, he is there. It was this silent, insistent, persistent presence that revealed a truth that everyone was about to ignore forever. This impact is so profound, because it puts us in front of a question that deep down we all fear. Who would be willing to fight to the end for us without worrying about the judgment of others? The dog demonstrated just that. He faced suspicious looks, hands that tried to restrain him, voices that demanded silence, but he didn't give up. He didn't need proof. He didn't need explanations. He only knew, and that certainty moved him until the truth was exposed. This is the kind of loyalty that is not measured in words, but in attitudes, and that makes us completely rethink the value of relationships. The wife, the children, the friends, all looked not only at the revealed papers, but at the animal that in silence had written the most important page of that story. With each look, with each gesture of affection towards the dog, it was evident that he had become more than a guardian. He was now a symbol of resistance against lies, of courage in the face of fear, of fidelity in the face of loss. His presence changed everything because it reminded everyone that even in the midst of pain there is something capable of rescuing us: loyalty. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because this loyalty that dogs carry is not just a curious or exciting detail. She is a real-life lesson. In a world in which so many relationships become superficial, in which so many decisions are made based on convenience or interest, the dog shows us a hidden truth. It is possible to love unreservedly, to trust unconditionally, to remain without expecting anything in return. This has a huge impact on our mindset because it forces us to rethink the choices we make every day. To what extent are we willing to be true to what we believe, even when everyone around us tells us to give up? To what extent can we stand firm in the face of what we feel, without fear of being judged? The dog had no doubts. He followed the heart, and in doing so transformed not only the narrative of that burial, but also everyone's perception of what it means to be faithful. And perhaps this is the greatest revelation of all. True loyalty is not revealed in easy moments, but precisely in those moments when it seems impossible to continue. It was at the height of pain, at the weight of parting, that the dog showed its strength. And that scene will be forever etched as proof that the purest fidelity is silent, but immensely powerful. The wind that passed between the trees, the distant sound of muffled voices, the restrained crying that still echoed, all this formed an atmosphere that seemed to eternalize that instant. The dog, now calmer, lay next to the coffin, as if to say, "My mission is over." And maybe that was it. He had fulfilled a role that no human would have the courage to play. He had faced them all. He had fought against appearances, and in the end he had saved the truth. The image of him there, resting next to the owner, was the perfect synthesis of what everyone felt but couldn't put into words. And that's why this story goes far beyond what happened in that cemetery. It invites us to reflect on our own lives, on how we treat those next to us, on how often we fail to hear signs that were there all along. Dogs, with their intuition, remind us that life is not only made of logic, but also of emotion, of sensitivity, of connection. And that often it is precisely this invisible connection that saves us. Perhaps the greatest learning is this: dogs do not speak our language, but they understand the heart like no one else. They sense the pain, share the joy, keep our secrets, and when necessary, push us toward the truth we try to deny. And that's what happened there. He not only revealed a hidden secret, but showed everyone that loyalty is indeed capable of transforming destinies. This is one of those stories that does not end when the coffin is closed or when the cemetery is left behind. On the contrary, it is a story that continues within each person who has witnessed it, because it carries in itself an eternal lesson. And that lesson is not only in the mystery revealed, but in the way it was revealed. It is in the insistent gaze of a dog, in the courage not to be silent, in the determination to follow the heart even when no one else believed. What about you? Have you ever had a remarkable experience with a dog? Tell us in the comments, subscribe to the channel so as not to miss more exciting stories like this, and share this video with those who love animals. After all that, if you've made it this far with me, you've noticed how stories like this aren't just about dogs, but about how they teach us about loyalty, courage, and true connection. It's for this kind of reflection that it's worth subscribing to the channel, because each video brings something that can touch, inspire, or even transform the way you see the world. And since you stayed until the end, leave there in the comments the phrase "I'm with you until the end." It will be our way of marking this exchange and showing that this message has found an echo in you. Oh, and also leave your like, because that way I understand that this conversation made sense and I can bring more and more content that really connects with you. And look, there is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there.